TFA Fam, how do you do? How are you? Hope all is well. It is Cody Kutzer and Kevin Still coming at you for the Week 10 buys and sells for the Fantasy Authority. You can find me on Twitter at CKutzerFF. You can find Kev on Twitter at FantasyRat13. Before we dive into this, make sure you are subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. If you're checking us out on YouTube for the first time, please be sure to slam that subscribe button. We really do appreciate it. I know we say it all the time. It sounds like a broken record, but it really has been awesome getting to engage with a lot of you, and we truly do appreciate it. So we're going to jump right into it. As we get inch closer and closer to the fantasy playoffs, which is mind-boggling. Crazy that we're already at this point. So Kev, why don't you lead us off, man? I'll give you the floor first. Who's a buy for you in Week 10 that you want to talk about?
All right, for me, it starts off, it's pretty easy. These two guys are obviously on the same team, and that is Jared Goff and Robert Woods. And I think I could even put in Cooper Kupp into this. The last time we saw the Rams, they did not look very good against the Dolphins. They were on bye this past week. But I do think there's a lot to like here with this Rams offense, at least to close out the season. Over the next 7 weeks, they get the Seahawks, which is a fantastic matchup. The Bucks is probably the one matchup that you probably, that don't love. But other than that, they play the 49ers, which doesn't really scare me all that much. You have the Cardinals, the Patriots, which we just saw Joe Flacco torch that defense. So I damn sure ain't worried about what they have to what they're offering. And then they play the Jets and then the Seahawks again, fantasy championship day. So they have a terrific schedule going forward. So there's a lot to like here between the both of them. If you look at Jared Goff, he hasn't, been a world beater, but he certainly hasn't killed you either. He does have 13 passing touchdowns, 2,100 passing yards, which is 11th in the league. So I do think, and this is an offense that, they're not throwing the ball a ton. There's 20th in pass plays per game, but their upcoming schedule is really why I wouldn't mind buying him, or if he's available, which he's probably available in quite a few waiver wires. Somebody I wouldn't mind adding and really running with over the next couple of weeks, at least, to close out the season, depending on who you may have. So the other one is Robert Woods. Absolutely love Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp for that matter. This one thing I like about both these guys, you're not really worried about where the targets are coming from because these dudes are both going to be peppered with targets. So Robert Woods, and he's also, picking up yards on the ground, but he's 17th in receptions. He has 435 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns on the season. He's averaging about 15.4 fantasy points per game, 22nd in fantasy points per game. So there's a lot to like there. So I do like Robert Woods and what he's going to provide over the upcoming weeks. He has the 7th easiest schedule remaining among wide receivers as well. So I do like him. And Cooper Kupp, same thing. Just both of them have terrific matchups, and I don't think it's going to take a ton to acquire them. I think most people probably are a little bit down on them because they've kind of been a little inconsistent this year. But I love Robert Woods and Jared Goff and even Cooper Kupp if you can acquire them. I just like this Rams offense as a whole. I just think their schedule moving forward is pretty appealing outside of the Bucks week.
I'm going to jump into my first buy for the week, and that is one Allen Robinson. Now, he's quietly wide receiver 9, I believe, in PPR scoring, but he's 17th in points per game. So he's kind of been a little bit up and down. He's someone else who's kind of been a little disappointing too. He had a stretch a few weeks ago where he was hitting like 19 points or more in 3 straight weeks. And it seems like the past couple weeks he's gotten there at double-digit points, but it's been like in garbage time. Like it hasn't been pretty. You're kind of sitting there through the third quarter and you're looking and he has like 5 or 6 points and he like finally gets there through the fourth quarter. But the thing I really like about him going forward, he's obviously seeing a large target share on that offense. And the Bears have the easiest passing schedule the rest of the way per Sharp Football Stats. And it's easy to see why. This is who they have coming up. The Vikings, fine by that. Packers, fine by that. Lions, Texans, the Vikings again, and then they finish off with the Jags in Week 16, which should be the end of your fantasy season, not Week 17. So, like I said, it's not always pretty with A-Rob, but you can basically lock in double-digit fantasy points week in, week out like clockwork. It doesn't matter if he's getting there with garbage time or not. He's still going to get you there. And like I said, we had him as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver going into the season. And I know there were a lot of people who felt the same way that we did. So you probably spent third round capital on him, and he just, like I say, just kind of been one of those players this year that just like he's putting the points up, like I said, 9th in PPR scoring, but 17th in points per game. So I still think you can go out and you can get him at a lesser cost than what he should be providing you the rest of the way.
Well, I mean, speaking of the Bears, I think David Montgomery, I kind of said it last week, but I'll say it again. I know he's coming off a concussion, but the dude's schedule, I mean, like you just mentioned, and their rushing schedule is also fantastic the rest of the season. So, we'll see how, if and when they bring Lamar Miller in here and, if he's able to get cleared from this concussion this week. But, I mean, it's hard to ignore a guy who is 9th in opportunity share, 7th in carries, 6th in targets, 4th in weighted opportunities. I mean, there's just a lot to like here. I mean, 13th in rushing yards, 9th in receiving yards, 5th in receptions. And I think for most people that when they look at David Montgomery, where he's 26th in fantasy points per game, people aren't going to be excited about rostering him. And I think you could easily obtain him. So with this upcoming schedule, it's hard to ignore. It's going to be really hard for him to be a complete bust, even closing out. And I think he provides nice depth. Maybe he's not somebody, I don't think he's like a league winning type upside, but I think that you can get enough from him that, in a pinch, if something happens, and let's be honest, 2020 has been a real bitch. Okay. Like with injuries and navigating those waters, I think people could really use some running back depth. Whether you're a team that is 8-1 or, 6-7-2, or even if you're 4-5, I think David Montgomery provides a nice depth, and I think he's just a nice piece, and it's really not going to take a whole lot to get him. And we'll talk about a couple sells that I have that I think that I would sell these players for David Montgomery.
Yeah, you were mentioning some of the opportunity numbers for David Montgomery. I will kind of play off of that, and I'm going to talk about someone who again has been a little disappointing, and that is Josh Jacobs. Now, Jacobs was being touted as a top 3 or top 5 running back heading into the season, but outside of his week 1 game where he had the 3 touchdowns against Carolina, he's, like I said, he's been disappointing. And one of the things that a lot of us bought into, whether it was the coach speak in the offseason or looking at his skill set and how he was used at Alabama, was his pass catching, and he's and being more involved in the passing game, and that hasn't panned out either. So all this sounds negative, but here is why I am buying Josh Jacobs if you can. He's still 8th in opportunity share among running backs. He's 2nd in carries. He's 3rd in red zone touches. He's 2nd in evaded tackles, 4th in yards created. So there's still a lot to like here with Josh Jacobs' profile. And I think with all those things, like especially with the touches and the red zone touches, that suggests that there's going to be positive touchdown regression coming. I know that the Raiders have a more difficult passing schedule than they do running over the remainder of the season. So I think Jacobs is somebody that you should be able to go out and get not relatively easy, but if you're talking to someone, because he was, let's not forget he was a second, beginning of the 2nd round pick during draft season. So if you can find someone who's frustrated, like I was talking about with Allen Robinson, I think Josh Jacobs is someone that you should be kicking the tires on.
Yeah, that's the only thing that would worry me with Josh Jacobs is their remaining schedule. I think they have like the 8th hardest remaining schedule for running backs. That would probably be the only thing that really concerned me with him. I mean, that's kind of what's hurt him all year. I mean, they've had a pretty brutal schedule in terms of, being able to run the football, because, I mean, this week they get the Broncos, which is not a good matchup for running backs, and the Chiefs, which is a good matchup, the Falcons, which is a good matchup. The Jets, I mean, the Jets have actually been pretty good against the run this year. It's one thing that they've actually done really well. They've been a pass funnel, terrible against the pass, but really good against the run. And then they get the Colts, the Chargers, and the Dolphins to close out the season. So, I think that's the only part of the equation, I guess, that I would be a little bit nervous about. But like you mentioned, I don't think it's gonna take a lot to acquire him either, because he hasn't been like just lighting it up, right? Really, since week 1. I mean, he's had some decent, weeks, but other than that, like, he hasn't really been smashing. So, where you're getting all that production from. So, I don't hate that either.
I wouldn't be paying what it would have cost, week 2 or 3 to trade for him. If you can get him at a slight discount, that's when I'm going to be most interested.
Yeah, I think you probably can. It's going to depend on, what you have to offer. But if you're really looking for a running back, I don't hate Josh Jacobs. So for me, another wide receiver that I really like is Tyler Lockett. So if you look at Tyler Lockett this year, he started off, pretty hot, right? 17 fantasy points, 19, 37. And then he fell off 5.9, 8.4. Then he had the monster week against Arizona where he scored 53, and then 7.3 and 8 and then 8 last week against Buffalo. So he's been really streaky this year. But I think if you can acquire him, I think I still like that, because if you look at a lot of his other numbers, I mean, he's still right up there at all the metrics that you're looking for. He's 11th in target share with 25.7% of the targets, 11th in total targets. He's number one in route participation. He is 10th in routes run. The Seahawks are still throwing it 39.3 times per game, which is 8th in the league. He's seeing a lot of slot snaps. He's 10th in the league in that. He is fourth in red zone targets as well. 653 air yards, which is 17th in the league. He's still 8th in receptions, 12th in receiving yards. And then he has 7 touchdowns, which is second in the league. And he's actually, 21.2 fantasy points per game, which is second. Now, if you took out that 50 burger, at least in terms of the fantasy points per game, is going to drop significantly, because that, is a lot of his production in that 1 week. But I still think there's a lot to like here in Tyler Lockett's profile. And I think you're going to be able to acquire him pretty relatively cheap compared to what he should be. If you look at their upcoming schedule, it's not fantastic, but it's not killer either. So, I mean, they get the Rams, which he should be, if Jalen Ramsey's back, DK Metcalf is certainly going to be the guy who's going to be seeing him. So I think I think he's going to be somebody who I think it gets targeted a lot more, because he is not going to be seeing that coverage from Jalen Ramsey. And then gets the Cardinals, which, we've seen already what he can do there. And then you get the Eagles, which is another offense you can throw on, the Giants, the Jets. Nothing you're worried about. Washington, which is much more of a pass funnel defense as well. And then you close out the year with the Rams. So really like the upcoming schedule as well. So I like Tyler Lockett quite a bit as somebody I think that you can buy low on right now. And I think that can really pay off coming down the stretch here. And then lastly, I just want to talk really quick about some handcuff backs that I think people should be looking to acquire as well, that probably aren't available on waiver wires, because this is kind of that point now where I would be trying to solidify my bench and set myself up for the playoffs, especially if you're a team that's 8-1, 7-2, that you can kind of take some risk here. But guys like Latavius Murray, because if something happens to Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, we saw it last year. We had those back-to-back 30 fantasy point production games. He would do the same thing this year for the Saints in this offense. He would be the bell cow running back there for the Saints. So I like Latavius Murray a lot. If he's available on your waiver wire, I think he's owned in like 60-some% of leagues. But if he is available on waiver wire, I would be snatching him up. If he is, if he's not, these are the type of guys I'd be looking to trade for some depth pieces, because Latavius Murray gets run anyways. I mean, it's not enough that you're going to want to start him on a weekly basis. But like I said, if anything happens to Kamara, he would be a smash play. I think guys like Le'Veon Bell can be acquired at RB4 prices. I like him quite a bit. I'm just looking at these offenses that are super explosive. If anything were to happen to the starter, I think these guys would be borderline RB1s, if not high-end RB2s. So, and it's not going to cost you anything. Instead of trying to go out and acquire a high-end running back, getting some of these guys that can provide depth in case something happens. That way you don't have to play the waiver wire and everything else to try to figure this out and try to, use your number one waiver priority, or maybe you've already used your fab budget for the year. So these are the guys that I think that I would be trying to acquire.
To piggyback off that again, someone who I have written down as another cheap buy, and if you played him in week 9, you might have already dropped him off your roster anyway, because of just the amount of full-on tilt that this guy caused, and that is Justin Jackson. Now, I know, don't throw your tomatoes just yet. Hear me out. We here at the Fantasy Authority were all over him last week. Kev, you talked about him. Brian talked about him, I think, in his DFS video. I talked about him in the prop video. Everything set up perfectly. Smash spot, all that. He obviously was super dominant because everybody was on him, right? And let's Let me see here. Let me check my notes. He had 3 snaps, no carries. Just the amount of I didn't see that he was questionable to return. I threw the game on. Why the hell is Kalen Ballage getting the ball? And then I went, scrambled, checking Twitter. He was questionable to return. Either got hurt on like the first play or in warmups or something. Like I didn't even fully dive into it because I myself was helping to tilt the earth off of its axis. But right now, because of that, that is the perfect time to go after somebody like Justin Jackson, because whoever played him last week, whoever owned him probably played him because of how well everything's set up. But he was definitely playing better than Joshua Kelly. Kalen Ballage has actually already been demoted back to the practice squad. So even though Jackson was only got those 3 snaps, we have to assume that it's not a significant injury, or obviously the Chargers wouldn't have demoted Ballage already after he showed fairly well last week. So like you were talking about with like kind of like wanting to get your bench together, like we can't always go after wide receiver ones and running back ones. Like you're just not going to have the ammo on your team to go after players like that. So going after Justin Jackson's and Latavius Murray's. That way, if injuries do occur or to get you through bye weeks to get you into the playoffs, or if these guys, we've seen, lesser value players just go on runs at the end of the season, that's what's really going to help you get through, the fantasy playoffs and get you to the ship. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to sells for week 10. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with the TFA fam here. I don't really have anybody. I was looking for someone to talk about with the sell. I was like, well, I could put some shit together, but we're going to be fully transparent here. I don't want to just throw talk about and bullshit my way through some sells that like I don't feel like super strongly about. I was looking at possibly like a Julio Jones, but he's on a bye week, so the only person you're really going to sell them to is someone who's like 8-1, 7-2, and just has the luxury of kind of holding off and being able to sit on him for through his bye week. So, Kev, I'm just going to give you the floor, man. I'm going to let you wax poetic and tell the people who you are looking at selling in week 10.
Yeah, it starts out for me with Zack Moss. I mean, Zack Moss has played well, especially over the last couple of weeks. Week 7 against the Jets, he had 10.2, which is anything to be excited about. But week 8, he had 20 fantasy points, where he had 14 carries for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then last week against Seattle, he had 9 carries for 48 yards and a touchdown, 12.8 fantasy points. He's been at least an RB2 in each of the last 2 weeks. He has outperformed and outplayed Devin Singletary. Last week the Bills really didn't have to throw the ball that much or run the ball that much. They threw the ball quite a bit. But Zack Moss is somebody that I think people are going to be trying to roster, and I actually think that he's a pretty smart sell. In my opinion, I think try to sell a little bit high here on what he's done the last couple of weeks, especially with all the people looking for running backs. Because if you look at their upcoming schedule, they get the Cardinals this week, which is probably another matchup where they're going to be running the ball or trying to throw the ball. Then they get the Chargers, which is not a good matchup for running backs. The 49ers have been really good against running backs. The Steelers, as we know, the Broncos. I mean, it is a murderer's row of really bad matchup for running backs here. And so I think if you can sell Zack Moss at this point, I think this would be a really smart move. Maybe you package with somebody else to try to acquire, another running back or what have you. But I just think I would definitely be trying to sell high on Zack Moss here, mainly because of this upcoming schedule. Past him, I have Todd Gurley. I've talked about, I think, Todd Gurley before, but I'm going to talk about him again. His numbers are basically being propped up by his total touchdowns. He has 9 touchdowns on the year, which is second in the league. But he's still only 15th in fantasy points per game because he's not utilizing the passing game. He only has 15 receptions on the year, which is 37th among all running backs. To only 22 targets, which is 31st. Like, he's basically become like an in-between the tackles grinder. They're just not using him in the passing game at all. And if that's the case, I mean, he's basically touchdown dependent. And I'm sorry, I just can't really mess with that. And they don't really have a great upcoming schedule either for running backs. So I think you sell high on Todd Gurley. Now, you mentioned that they're on bye, so that is tough. But Maybe this is a move that you look at and you put in the back of your pocket, and next week, as soon as everything's moving forward, you move Todd Gurley, because he's played, his numbers do not support of where he should be. Basically, all of his numbers become, he is first in the league in red zone touches with 42 and 9 total touchdowns, but the rest of the numbers there are pointing in the opposite direction of, you should be looking to sell because he's completely touchdown dependent, and if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to get you shit for points. So I just wouldn't want to mess with that. I feel like you're going to be looking in the fantasy playoffs where he gives you some really bad weeks. So I don't know. I just would prefer to sell Todd Gurley at this point. See what you can get for him. Unless you just can't get anything for him, you hold. But other than that, I'm selling Todd Gurley. And then I have Curtis Samuel. Now, this is a definite sell high. Curtis Samuel the last 3 weeks is like crushed. Week 7, he put up 17.3. And then week 8, he put up 20.7. And then last week against the Chiefs, he dropped 26.8 fantasy points. However, if you look at all his totality of his numbers, I mean, he's 89th in air yards on the year. Okay, like, not good. He only has a 15% target share, which is 65th in the league, 59th in targets. He's only running a route on 76% of his snaps. He's 62nd in routes run. Like, there's a lot to like. Now, I know he's been trending up more. He's being utilized more lately than he has earlier in the year, so that's going to affect some of the numbers. But regardless of that, this is not sustainable production for Curtis Samuel. Okay, so this is the easiest sell high as you possibly can. You move Curtis Samuel as he's at the peak of his value, and this is fantasy 101. So I would move Curtis Samuel for what you can get for him. I think you could probably acquire a decent wide receiver 3 for the production that he's been putting up the last couple of weeks. People are going to overpay for what he's done, and I think that's a mistake. So I would sell Curtis Samuel as fast as I possibly can.
We're going to wrap things up, guys. Appreciate you joining in. If you're listening to this or watching this on Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon, we will be going live on Wednesday night, talking about start sits, trades, waivers, answering all your questions. And if you miss out on Wednesday, we always go live on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. So we will be around to answer your questions then as well. So until Wednesday night, Sunday, whenever you catch us, or you can always reach out to us on Twitter. You can find the TFA account on Twitter at @FF_authority. We will talk to you guys then. See ya!